So Mick, we're back. We're doing it again. We're having a chat. I'm Richard Hatcher,
Mick Waters.
and we're here to talk about Ukraine. And the reason I want us to talk about Ukraine is primarily because I think what the West does at this point is really critical. I think what they have done for the last 3 years has been critical, and personally I've been underwhelmed with their response. But they're in a really tight spot now with the US splintering away from Europe, or at least the US administration splintering away from Europe's thinking around the crisis. And I also want to talk about what precedent are we setting by our response now. I think it's really critical.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, not only for the people who have lost their lives in Ukraine, lost their livelihoods. It's a fundamental shift in the way the world operates. After World War II, we had a bit of a pact, the NATO pact, that there'd be certain groups that would protect each other. What's happening at the moment is we're moving away from that. So it's a really important issue. We want to do it justice. So we want to go back in time a bit, talk about the history. The history is quite important. Whilst we think that this is just happening today, this has been going on for hundreds of years. Last 10 years, most importantly, we'll focus on back to 2014, the invasion of Crimea, and then we'll come from there to the future, talk about the ceasefire talks. We want to also understand what it means for us as people here in Australia, but also what it means for the world order as well. So let's get into this important issue.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. So I know you've done a lot of research on the history, both recent history and going back centuries. Did you want to give us a quick speed run of?
I'll give you a quick speed run, and it is complex, and I hope I do it justice. So, the Ukraine and Russia have always been linked for hundreds of years. The Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire as well as Crimea as well. It then became part of the Soviet Empire. When that fell apart, it became its own sovereign, independent nation. Now, it's been a recent time in 1991, so a nation as young as it is going to have a bit of teething problems, and corruption remains a problem in the Ukraine, and that's been preyed upon. So 2014, what was happening is there was a president at the time, Yanukovych, who was an ally of Putin. Putin at that stage, he'd been elected in 2000. Vladimir Putin, as we all know, ex-KGB spy. He grew up in that. He's a master of deception, war, creating allies. This is his bread and butter. That's what he lives and breathes.
Yeah, he was in Berlin, right? That's where he cut his teeth.
Yeah.
Right?
So as a spy, yeah, as a president, political leader, 2000 is when he became the Russian president. So yeah, he learned all those crafts in those times. The end of World War II, Germany gets carved up, Russia takes a bit of it, the GDR and East Berlin. So yeah, I believe he was operating in that part. So in 2014, we had a Russian president, Yanukovych, who was a Putin ally. The people of Ukraine didn't love that so much, and there was an uprising. Yanukovych flees the country. Putin, in response, invades Crimea, and this is where it starts. So Crimea has always been a critical part, and it's passed back and forth between Russia and Ukraine over hundreds of years, and it's a bit of a beach resort where Russian oligarchs go. So this is where we are in 2014. One of the things that the Russians start in 2014 is this misinformation, disinformation campaign. You might remember they were saying, well, these aren't Russian troops. They're just rebel groups that are loosely aligned. And it was spreading this misinformation through TVs and radios and Russian-controlled media. And this is a really important thing to remember. It's a Russian tactic to confuse people about what's going on.
Yeah, and also, Michael, on that point, in 2014, the Russian story was the Maidan uprising was US infiltration, trying to install a Western-aligned leader, but all credible sources point to there being fair elections.
Yeah,
and after a short period of an interim, President Zelensky was fairly elected.
Yes.
Poroshenko was Petro Poroshenko was fairly elected,
Yes.
not without meddling.
That's it, yeah. And I think the important thing here, the Russians are very good at saying if they accuse you of doing something, it's a projection. They're doing it themselves. So if they're accusing of US interference, they're interfering themselves. It's a pretty transparent strategy. So this is when they've started to mature these tactics, these disinformation, misinformation tactics. The world from 2014 looked very poorly on this. So they were kicked out of the G8, which became the G7, and then sanctions were placed on from Europe. So the next thing that we get to is 2016 election, and this is quite important because this is when Trump...
US election,
Trump versus Clinton. Yeah. But leading up to that, we had Trump fighting Republicans to become the Republican nominee. And for a long time, it was just comedy. It was a bit of a joke. People thought, how could this person ever become the leader of the free world? And he did it quite expertly because this is a quite conundrum. If you're ever in a fight, an argument, a debate with an irrational person, it's very hard to win. Very hard to have a rational person beat an irrational person. And Trump was very good at taking quite large, important topics and boiling them down to crazy things about his hand size and his penis size. And this happened in the Republican primaries. So overnight, we had people who were accused of, we had people whose dad was accused of killing JFK. His opponents, who were accused of all sorts of things, fell in behind him. So it was a very curious time. But out of 2016, it was found by many media sources around the world that Russia had interfered with that election. So the CIA found this, the NSA found FBI. They said Russia had interfered in that by creating thousands of Facebook and Twitter bots and just spreading so much misinformation and division throughout the US. Now, the democratic system is already very flawed. You don't have to get out to vote. The electoral college is there. There's voter suppression. There's gerrymandering. So it's already very weak. It was very easy to get in there and look for the weaknesses and exploit them. And then Trump gets elected. So Trump
and so amongst this misinformation campaign, there was a bias towards Trump.
Absolutely, there was a bias towards Trump. And this is important. So we've got Russia obviously picking their preferred candidate, who was Trump, and they wanted him to get elected. Why did they want to get him elected? I mean, this is the question. And this is still in 2016. We're in 2025. Both of these become very, very, very important. One of the things that Hillary Clinton has said, and Hillary Clinton is an aggrieved former candidate, but she has said that why did Putin and Trump, why are they so close? And there's been a lot of people that have asked this question, and Hillary has said that the Trumps do a lot of business in Russia. A lot of their hotel projects and golf projects are funded by Russian banks. So this is all still very speculative, but what we know is there's quite a bromance going on between Putin and Trump going all the way back to 2016.
Yeah. Malcolm Turnbull.
Turnbull called out the bromance. So the next thing we've got, 2019, we've got Vladimir Zelensky elected in a landslide. So he wanted to get in, end the conflict, stop the corruption that's at play. And from 2019, that's when the war really steps up. So that's when the border regions start to get invaded, and that's when the war really kicks off in 2022. This is when Putin, as the aggressor, has given his list of things that could stop the conflict. And it's important to remember these because they still exist. This is that Ukraine can't be a member of NATO. NATO, as we all know, is the organisation, North America Treaty Organisation, Atlantic, that was created at the end of World War II to prevent World War III, just to get people to get along. From that time, we've got war. In between that, Trump calls Zelensky and says, look, I'll give you some money to help you fight the war as long as you launch a campaign into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. So this is a bit of a segue, but it's an important thing. This goes and gets Trump impeached. I was in America at the time, and I've got the Washington Post on my wall that says Trump impeached.
And at this point in time, Hunter Biden was on a retainer for 50 grand a
Yeah,
month.
so it's a very tricky piece because Hunter Biden was working in the Ukraine. He was doing business dealings. Now, this curious occurrence looked pretty bad. It was later looked into quite heavily, and they could never really find if it was pure corruption, but it just looked bad. It just quite stunk. Joe Biden later goes on to pardon Hunter Biden, which makes it look extra stinky.
Well, there was a few other things in there. Like, so Hunter Biden, he had a few board appointments.
Yeah.
Largely due to his last name, perhaps.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, that's the reason he got those board appointments. There's no doubt about that. For influence.
Yeah. But I think what got him caught up with the law was maybe an unregistered firearm.
Yeah, he was smoking crack.
Yeah.
He was doing dodgy stuff. So later on, I mean, he's a kid or an adult. Joe Biden pardons him directly for those charges, but also in case Trump trumps up charges right back until he was born. So it's a very muddy area.
But Zelensky doesn't cooperate.
And
Trump holds that against him.
Trump gets really annoyed. So this is, if we look back to footage of those time, Zelensky, he was an actor, a comedian. Interestingly, he became famous in Ukraine for starring in a TV show about a teacher who becomes a president, and then art imitates life, or vice versa. Life imitates art, and he becomes the president. He goes and has a sit down with Trump. Trump puts the hard word on him, and Zelensky thinks, this is the real deal. This is the real stuff. This is the real nefarious Machiavellian strategic stuff that people probably warned me about. And we've got the leader of the free world saying to me, I'll give you money, but only if you launch investigations into my political opponents. And Zelensky thinks, this is the real deal.
Yeah.
From then on, we push on. So what we've got now, we're going to jump, that's the background, right? So that's everything leading up to now. Trump gets re-elected at the end of 2024, and a big part of his strategy was to end
the war in 24 hours.
End the Ukraine war, end the war in Gaza. He's the guy. He's a transactional guy. He's a deal maker. Yeah, but a transactional person can behave without morality, without ethics, and they can look at, it's a very Machiavellian thing. They just see the end, they want to tick a box, and they want to move there. They're not totally concerned about the ethics of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, do we want to talk about maybe some of the Russian talking points around the war, the NATO expansion stuff?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a view on that. Maybe I'll share my view. And
go
give
for
me
it.
yours. But Putin's always said that he was promised by the states that there'd be no expansion of NATO.
Yeah.
I think in 2005.
Yeah.
Verbal conversation, I think, nothing signed. And then there were additional weapon systems installed in NATO countries. Putin didn't like it. My counter to that would be NATO countries are entitled to behave as they wish. There is still, in the modern era, in the post-World War II era, there's no credible threat of an invasion of Russia from any NATO country or any Eastern European country. I think those countries would, I mean, they're really not posturing, they're really not threatening to go on an imperial rampage. I believe clearly the threat is from Russia. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, really good points. I mean, let's get back into Putin's psyche as best we understand it. So Putin dreams of a time where the Russian Empire is remade. a lot of these strong guys think back to some mythical, nostalgic land that may or may not exist. So this land includes that Russia and Ukraine are the same country. Putin doesn't really see a difference between those old Soviet territories and the Russian Empire. NATO, he's always seen it to be pure evil because it's one goal, and really its predominant goal was to stop the expansion of Russia. So
yeah, and it's capitalism, democracy.
Yeah, it's a
hates.
complete dichotomy of, just as you said, Cold War. It's a child of the Cold War. When straight after World War II, there was already plans to fight the Russians because they were communists. They needed them to prop up the Eastern Front, and millions of them died, as well as Ukrainians. But then we've got capitalism, communism, we've got the Orthodox Church, we've got whatever churches exist over here, real different worlds, and then we've got proxy battles that went on for years and years after that. So Putin is a child of that. He believes that Russia is the alternate superpower to the West, and so his motivations are to stop things like breakaway countries like Ukraine, stop Ukraine. He wants to weaken America, who's the alternate superpower. He wants to weaken Europe. And what he does is it's about breaking apart these institutions, things like the World Bank, the IMF, the EU, the US, chipping away at the things they believe in, like democracy, going after their elections.
And looking to date at what he's achieved, sadly, I think we would say he's been very effective. Russia has been very effective at destabilising the West, and in particular the States.
Oh, completely, yeah. So the 2016 election and the 2020 election, I mean, it's perverse that we hold up America as a bastion of democracy, because they're not a democracy, but they get the most play of it. But similar things have happened in right-wing media all around the world. And Rupert Murdoch, and I think we've touched on this in previous episodes, is these sort of conservative media outlets, they can spit out these talking points. And interestingly, in some of these elections, the 2016 and 2020, people have actually been spitting out Russian talking points. And it's about spreading...
And 2024.
And 2024, yeah. It's about spreading this misinformation.
To the point where the White House is just repeating pretty much verbatim what's coming out of
we've got
Russia
a thing now where the Republicans seem to be completely owned by Russia. There's also been beliefs that places like the NRA and some of these Christian organisations have been funded by Russia, some of these other far-right organisations.
Although there are some holdouts within the Republican Party that...
There are some, yeah. There are some. So this is the world, and this is the convoluted landscape where we've got Russia yearning back to be a superpower, and we've got America in decline. And then all of a sudden, Trump says he's going to end the war. So let's get into what Trump and the Republican Party were doing very quickly after Trump gets elected. So Trump is officially president in November.
So he won the election in November.
And then he becomes president in January. So one of the first things he does, he picks up the phone to Putin. One of the first leaders he speaks to on the phone, they supposedly have an hour-long phone call. And the whole world is surprised because in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and war, everybody knows that you had one party invaded another party. So Russia invaded Ukraine. That's not up for debate.
But the Russians will tell you otherwise.
Russians will tell you otherwise. They said they came in to denazify the place, that the Russians in the border regions and the Russian-speaking people were being persecuted.
Yes.
There were all sorts of horrors going on. There were corruption. Now, that part is true. Ukraine does have corruption, and it's because they are
as does Australia and
that's
the US.
Right. They're a growing state. So this whole tactic is about taking a grain of truth not the Nazification, because Zelensky himself is Jewish. But the corruption part, that there's a bit to that. And then dialing it up, pumping air into it.
And the conflict in the Donbass region, it was able to be misconstrued as some sort of organic grassroots uprising when it's plainclothes military Russian guys stirring up trouble. And then the Russian story is that when this organic uprising occurred in the Donbass and the Ukrainian military came to attack that's when the war started. That's the Russian story.
Yeah, so you're right. You've got this shred of dot of truths. You've got Russian-speaking people or Ukrainian-speaking people on these territories that have been disputed for hundreds of years. So you've got people with familial links across borders, and they come in, they take it over, and they hold these sham elections and say, the people have decided. I mean, the great thing about democracy is it's very, very easy to fake elections. Very easy. If you've got corrupt actors that want to control ballot boxes, they do counting that's not supervised, they gerrymander districts. In fact, America is the perfect example of how you break a democracy. Democracies are very easy to control, and Russia's very good at that. And it was the thinking that, well, dictatorships and authoritarian governments are not that trendy, so let's pretend to be democratic and liberal. So, and this is the place we're at now. It's all very opaque. It's all very confusing. There's a war that's been going on for 3 years. Lots of people dead. And here we are now. Trump picks up the phone to Putin, the person who started the war, and says, what would you like? What's your shopping list? What would you like to get out of this? Now, the guy's a transactional president, so I've listened to a lot of views on this. Let's do the for Trump view first, because this is an interesting one. Until Trump has come along, nobody else has been able to, and the war hasn't stopped, it's still fighting. No one has at least been able to bring them to the table. Europe hasn't, and the leaders of Europe, Britain, France, and Germany haven't. So for a moment, just for a moment, it's worthwhile thinking, okay, so we've brought them to the table.
Well, just on that for a moment, Mick, Macron's travelled to Russia maybe once or twice since the start of the war, even perhaps immediately before it, to try and talk sense into Putin in the same way that Neville Chamberlain tried to talk to Hitler.
And appease Hitler.
But it didn't work.
It didn't work.
So it's not that Trump is just a better mediator.
No.
It's that he's more
and that
open.
Is not what I'm saying.
He's just more open to Putin's worldview and more aligned.
Yeah, they're both, well, one's a dictator, one perhaps wants to be a dictator.
Yeah.
They're both strong men. They both believe in might is right. They believe in power over dithering about. And as I said,
as
I said in the first episode, asking Susan what she was doing on the weekend. This is about getting in and barging through and
just
getting
committing a few war crimes and getting out.
Well, what do they say? You know, you kill one person, you're a murderer. You kill a million, you're a revolutionary. This is the sort of massive godlike thinking that goes on in these heads. And Trump loves this sort of stuff. Trump's a big fan of Putin. He's a big fan of Kim Jong-un. He's a big fan of anyone who can just barge through and not get bogged down by democracy. So he's speaking to Putin. Putin gives out his shopping list of what he wants, which of course is what Putin's always wanted. Ukraine can't be a member of NATO. Ukraine needs to give up this
territory
conflict.
It's lost. Give
up the territories. And Trump also at the same time thinks, you know what, at the same time, I want something out of this as well. Because Trump's a transactional person. He likes deals. He likes cash. He likes money. He likes
He doesn't like to think that he got the worst end of a deal. He doesn't want to give aid for the sake of being a good citizen, a good global citizen. Doesn't want to help Ukraine because they're the underdog in a brutal conflict. He will offer aid on a very conditional basis. And he believes, he's spouted that the US has given $500 billion. The real figure is closer to $100 billion. But he wants to recoup this imagined $500 billion, and out of his administration has come the proposal.
Yeah, it's a different approach. I mean, all aid really is transactional, but it's never this crude. It's never this.
Give me $500 billion of your rare earths.
Yeah, it's like solicitation.
Yeah.
It's like prostitution. It's never been this clear.
There's no flirtation here. It's just straight to business.
Out, pants off. Let's get down to business.
Yeah.
A lot of aid has always been about, okay, so I'm gonna build some capacity. I'm gonna buy some influence in your country. So
education, infrastructure.
Let's never pretend that aid is good. Remember Band-Aid from the 80s saying, "Do they even know it's Christmas after all?" I mean, that wasn't good either. Let's never say that all aid is good.
That's pretty tone deaf.
That's very tone deaf. But no one, at least in the West, has ever been so much like a prostitute to say, I want this and you're going to do this for me.
It's rough. Look, Mick, I'm perhaps a little bit more idealistic than you. I don't believe the concept of aid is dead. I do believe that wealthy nations and individuals have an obligation to less fortunate people and countries. But there's ways of doing it. And imposing cultural norms on another country, that's unacceptable.
It's very tone deaf. So this is the start of the piece. There's other things that are really important that I also want to talk about, because it wasn't just Trump talking to Putin. It was a complete philosophical shift for the US at 360. Because communism... You before made a really important distinction. You said the US administration. We never said the US in general, but the current administration has made a shift in their philosophy in how they deal with Europe and how they deal with the world.
And it's so abrupt, Michael, because there's so much momentum in spending programs. And we're talking about billions of dollars a year. You can talk about US aid, you can talk about aid for Ukraine. So to date, the US has spent about $100 billion. So we're talking about tens of billions of dollars a year going out, and to just abruptly threaten or stop, say, I'm going to cancel that, I'm going to stop doing this. That has huge consequences because the US is such an enormous country. It's not just the flow of funds and equipment and all of that, but it's the cultural shift. Yeah. What does it tell people about what's normal and what's good and what's right? Because the US for so long has been seen as the international policeman.
Yes.
We're just smashing that concept to bits.
Absolutely. Yeah. Overnight. You've got the cash, which is dried up, which is important because for whatever crazy reason, and this is true, that the European defence apparatus is backed with US money. So there's
a lot of US bases, a lot of US equipment.
Yeah. So the whole global security apparatus is full of US dollars.
And equipment and intelligence,
bases,
infrastructure,
and missiles and nuclear weapons. I mean, even Australia, little old Australia over here, this little, island in Asia, we're protected by US missiles. This is the crazy thing. So that's the first thing. That's the treasure part. That's just cut off. Not cut off, but threatened to be cut off.
Yeah, that's the messaging.
That's the messaging. And then we've got the other rhetoric. The rhetoric has moved into, well, why should we keep paying for you? These are the things Trump said.
Yeah.
Why should we keep paying for you?
Yeah.
Why don't you pay for himself? We've got J.D. Vance, who's the vice president, goes to Europe and says, why are we paying for you? Why don't you fund your own defence? And then quite another dramatic shift, saying, we want to talk to the far-right parties. We want to talk to Alternative for Deutschland. We want to talk to Marine Le Pen's parties. These are the considered the far-right parties. So what they're saying is, you in Europe, you're supposed to be champions of liberty and equality and fraternity, but you're suppressing these people, these far-right parties. Again, so we've got this money shift and we've got this political shift, and it's happened overnight.
Yeah, look, money talks. Obviously, Musk has been a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was unclear to me 10 years ago that we would have seen what appears to be an internal political shift within Musk. I thought his intention to hasten the transition to renewable transport.
Yeah.
I really thought he was a centrist, an environmentalist. But yeah, the last few years sort of turns that concept on its head a bit. And he's a man of means.
Yes.
Huge amount of money, huge platform, owning X.
Power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately.
Yeah.
So this is the shift. Now what we've got is, so Putin's given his shopping list. We've got JD Vance telling Europe the party's over, we're not playing anymore. And then we've got Pete Hegseth as well, the Defence Secretary, saying to everybody, yeah, we're not going to give Ukraine back their territories, and they're not going to be a part of NATO. And also, by the way, we're not going to give you any more troops.
Yeah. I believe he said it was unrealistic for Ukraine to go back to their pre-2014 borders, which to me is obscene and offensive.
Completely offensive. We've had people bombed, killed, under constant attack. We've had
raped, tortured,
children kidnapped. We've had people giving up their lives to go and fight a war in their own land. They're the invaded party.
Yeah, and this is what really gets to me, Michael, because if collectively, perhaps just Europe now, doesn't stand up and force the aggressor back and not let them win, it's sending the message that bullying pays.
Doesn't it? Yeah, it's saying that unchecked power
if you're strong
is
enough,
unchecked.
If you're strong enough, you can take my stuff,
That's
you
right.
can abuse me, and my friends aren't going to do anything about it.
And these values, these things that we hold to be true are just concepts, figments.
Yeah.
And that if I've got enough money and enough power, I'll just smash them.
Yeah.
And you can't go and bleat to your powerful friends because you don't have any powerful friends. Because at the end, your most powerful friend's given up.
Yeah.
And your other secondary powerful friends, Britain, Germany, France, they're all squabbling over what to do.
Don't want to dance with a nuclear bully.
The whole nuclear thing it's a big deal, and it was always a big deal. The fact that after the Cold War, everyone had nuclear weapons, and it was the only thing, the mutually assured destruction was the only thing stopping everyone from killing everyone. And that's what stopped the madness. So we ended up with Britain's got weapons, France has got weapons, Russia's got weapons, India's got weapons, Pakistan's got weapons, South Africa's got weapons, some other people have got weapons.
I think Germany has US nukes.
Yeah, some other people are Turkey's housing US nukes as well. And so that was always an important thing to remember back in 2014 and all the way up to 2022, because a part of NATO, Article 5, I believe, was you invade a NATO country, the whole world has to, all the other NATO members have to come in and support,
Yeah.
All for one and one for all, Three Musketeers sort of vibe.
Yeah.
And this is what people were scared about, because they thought, okay, if Ukraine is a NATO member and then Russia, who's already invaded Ukraine, we would then have to respond. And how do we respond? Because Putin threatened nuclear weapons. So the only thing to defeat nuclear weapons is nuclear weapons. And then before you know it, a few days gone by and half the world is scorched, which is obviously a very bad outcome.
Obviously. In my view, Michael, that was a hollow threat. It was always a hollow threat.
Yeah, we hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess enough European countries took it seriously enough.
Why wouldn't I'd take it seriously?
Well, I wouldn't, because collectively the states, NATO, have a dangerous enough nuclear arsenal to make Putin think twice about launching anything. I don't think he would do it. So
why don't you think he would do it?
So the West has been slow to deliver Ukraine lethal aid. I remember Germany in the beginning in 2022, they're like,
the hypersonic weapons
we'll
discussion.
give you some helmets.
Yeah.
And we're sort of slow, but like even with the aid that Ukraine did get, they were able to mount a pretty effective defense straight off the bat. Russia thought they were going to sweep in, take Kyiv, take Hostomel.
Yeah, they're scrappy. They've got drones, they've got people. And
they did well with what they had.
You've got citizens fighting back about their own territory. And Russia had young conscripted kids. So
yeah, the motivations were different.
They were fighting for their homeland.
But why do I think Russia wouldn't have used nukes? So to date, now a lot of lethal aid has been coming in from Poland, UK, Germany, US, and to date Russia hasn't launched any nuclear missile. I don't think they would, because it's such a order of magnitude step up.
It's madness.
It's madness. I think if in 2022, if NATO or another selection of European countries, Poland, Germany, France, the UK, had have said, look, we have the intelligence, Russia, we know you're planning to invade Ukraine. I'm just letting you know that we will be providing air support, ground support, all sorts of support. You step one foot into Ukraine and you'll be losing that equipment and those personnel. Don't do it. I think if we said that and meant that, I think we'd be living in a better and different world.
It's a pretty solid war game, though, to hope that an irrational actor is not going to escalate this to the point of it being a nuclear war.
I believe it was a massive bluff, and I believe it paid off.
Of course, it paid off. I mean, I think you've got to treat crazy people with respect. You've got to assume that they could do the worst possible.
He's crazy, but he understands the danger of nuclear weapons, and I think he knows that if he were to launch a nuclear weapon, particularly at a NATO state, that then he's really
that's right. It's
wrong.
over. Like we've got. It's terrifying to think about the
NATO
arsenal.
could have immediately accepted Ukraine in January 2022, and there'd be no war.
Okay, so
my view. That's my view.
Yeah, so that's a hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical.
The other counter hypothetical is whether it's intentional, whether it's a nervous person with their finger on the trigger, and then it escalates to a nuclear conflict. Two hypotheticals.
Agree.
I think where we are now in a mad world is we've now got another irrational actor in Trump dealing with another irrational actor in Putin, and they have made the most progress thus far to bring at least those two to a table. So where we get to after Trump and Putin's phone call, JD Vance and Pete Hegseth, is we've got a meeting in Saudi. And it's so important to state here, whilst it seems obvious to state that Ukraine is still not involved in these talks. So the talks have been going on for a couple of weeks at this stage. Zelensky is still not briefed. No one has spoken to Zelensky.
I believe he's on his way to the States, so there will be discussions, but they've involved him at the very late
going back
stage.
in time. And we're still in February. This started at the start of February, is up until the point where there was a meeting in Saudi with American officials, Marco Rubio, and Russian officials. And again, they spat out the Russian shopping list, which was no NATO for Ukraine, all the territories to be given back to Russia, including Crimea, or given back, or not given back to Ukraine.
Just the borders.
Yeah, you just carve it up. And then, of course, US has always want something as well. There's 500 billion of rare earth minerals in Ukraine and we want a slice of that. We want to be able to be made whole because, as you were talking about it, aid could be seen as virtuous in itself, or aid could be seen as an IOU, quid pro quo, or something I'm going to give to you and get something in return.
Yeah.
And so Trump says, well, Ukraine, you've got nothing. We've given you, he says, $350 billion in weapon. You say 150 billion. It's still a lot of billion.
It's a lot of money either way.
And so Trump wants his piece of the pie.
Yeah. Yeah. In my view, it's dirty and inappropriate. And I think we should help people for the sake of defending our values, our shared values.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, in my case, at the cost of the war crimes, the lost lives, the lost kids, it wasn't worth it. Like, I think to try and prevent those things is a noble act and is worth it in and of itself. But Trump doesn't think so.
Trump doesn't think so, and he's got a kindred spirit in Putin. So they think the same. There's a bromance going on. So they're getting traction. So Zelensky gets pissed off. He tells the world he's pissed off. And what does Trump do? In all Trump sense, Trump doubles down like no one else. Trump just unleashes, gets on Truth Social, which is his crazy version of X, and says, Zelensky's a dictator. You started the war. Zelensky started the war. So the guy that gets invaded is accused of starting the war and has said, you should have settled this. Settling is such a crude term. A settlement is like a divorce or a legal proceeding or some sort of business deal. Yeah. Not about someone's being invaded.
Yeah. Trump specifically said, I never would have started it. I would have made a deal already, which is utter madness.
It's so transactional. It's so psychopathic even.
Psychopathic.
It removes all emotion from the situation and says, it is what it is.
Well, it's just that, okay, so someone invades me, kills a bunch of people, breaks a bunch of my stuff, rapes a bunch of women, takes my territory.
Takes your children. There's
takes my kids.
Tens of thousands of kids kidnapped.
And I should say, I'm sorry for upsetting you.
So sorry, man.
Have all that stuff. And
have you seen my rare earth minerals? They're quite nice. Do you want some of them?
It's ridiculous.
Wrap it up. Let's go get a Big Mac.
Yeah.
And so this is where we're at. And all the while, Europe is standing there going, oh, crikey, what should we do?
Yeah, that's the interesting next step, Michael, and it's something to keep our eyes on. So Keir Starmer has recently said, all right, we're going to up our defence spending 2.5% of GDP. He's a fierce proponent for Ukraine. Let's hope that Macron also...
Yeah, so Macron's had some good things. They had a very awkward interview in the White House where Macron was saying, no, we're giving Ukraine to fund the war because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, so Trump was saying, Europe's loaning money, they're getting their money back, we're not getting our money back. And yeah, he got live fact-checked by Macron, which was a beautiful moment.
And Macron really flipped him, made Trump look like a real pugnacious piece of a human potato that he is.
It's always nice to think, Michael, that common sense, humility and compassion can win in the world.
It is such a dream to think that. I don't think it always wins.
Sometimes it's got to be nasty.
You've got to be a bit of a thug. So one of the people, quite ironically, who's jumped out in Ukraine's defence is Mike Pence, former vice president. And he said, Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Start in inverted commas. Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion causing hundreds of thousands of lives. This is quite a shift. And as you were saying before, we said the US administration. No country is a monolith. No political party is one thinking brain, although the Republicans seem to have one thinking brain at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's nice to know there's that glimmer of hope on this particular topic with individuals such as Mike Pence. I'm sure he's not the only Republican who sees sense when it comes to Russia. So that's the glimmer of hope for the Republicans and the right in America. And I hope that wins out in the long run.
I hope it does as well. So that's everything up to where we are now. So what do we think this means for us as people? What do we think an aggressor, let's say an aggressor of anywhere in the world, invades, they sow so much misinformation, they get people confused, and then they win in the end. What does that say about us?
Yeah, I agree, Mick. I think it's really fraught. I think we're really playing with our own concept of what it means to be human and good humans.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for the West, and I say West, mostly Europe, Australia also. I mean, Australia has, in modern times at least, such a European heritage. It's a large part of our heritage. For the values and the direction that Ukraine wants to head in, the populace, they want to be a democracy.
Yes.
They want fair elections. For the most part, they want to rein in corruption. They want freedom. They want some form of capitalism. And collectively, if we don't give them enough support to win, it's us saying we just don't care enough about you.
Yeah. It's saying, we're going to keep you ticking along, helping you a little bit on the sidelines. We're not going to help too much because we don't want to get involved. Yeah. But it talks to, do you stick up for your friends, your mates? What does that mean?
To what extent, yeah.
Does it mean that, it gets down to human level. What do we accept? Do we accept horrific treatment to people?
Yeah.
And we all would hope that if something was going on of this magnitude, that we would get in and help. And
exactly. I mean, we're a small country on an island. If we were threatened by a larger country, we would hope that collectively nations would stand up and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this. Borders are borders. If you look through the entire history of humanity, going back hundreds of thousands of years, we've always been warring and fighting, but we have to believe that we can better ourselves as a species and get to a point where we say, okay, borders are borders. We did a lot of fighting in the past, but for now we need to govern within our borders. We need to cooperate on a global level. We just can't be fighting over territory all the time. That's a really medieval mindset.
It is medieval, and I think the other thing that we spoke about in previous episodes is this sort of autocratic, fascist-light government just is about smashing institutions, smashing the judiciary, smashing government organisations, the public service, the sort of structure, the glue that holds countries together. They come in with their own views and say, we don't like any of this, we're going to trash it all and rebuild it. But, and we spoke about this in the Doge episode, what's also happens in fascist, the start of fascist countries, they control the judges, they control the media, and so they break everything and try to build it in their own world. And if Ukraine doesn't get defended, it also says the other apparatus that we built above our countries, NATO and defences and the UN and the EU and these other structures that we built to protect everybody, because we learnt in World War II and Rwanda and other things that if we can defend people, we should get in and defend people, we should help people. And that's, getting out from what it means just for us as people on the world, those values of decency and justice and democracy and true versions of democracy and free speech, we want that to translate to the rest of the world. And we're always going to have aggressors and belligerents and people making war, but you would hope that we can stop them with
As
an
a
opposing
community.
force.
Yeah.
With an opposing force. But all of this makes it very confusing.
It is confusing, Michael. Yeah, I think we've had an excellent discussion.
Excellent discussion. I hope that anyone listening around the world, we believe deeply about this. This is such an important issue. There's still a war raging at the moment. It's still underfoot. And we just hope some sort of reason can come into this conversation. And this sort of belligerence, it just can't go on.
Can't, Mick.
I think that's where we need to leave it.
All right.
All right.
Till next time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.